Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Apologies for my voice. I'm just getting over a cold that one of my daughters kindly shared with me, so you'll have to bear with me if I need to get frequent drinks of water. The good news is, welcome. 10 things that you don't know about Meraki Wireless. If you've enrolled for this session, welcome. Hopefully, I'll be able to show you some things that you weren't too sure you were aware of within Dashboard. The bad news is, if you've enrolled for Juggling for Beginners, you're in the wrong session, but everybody's welcome, so please stay. Feel free to stay. As you're probably well versed already, please take use of the WebEx space. I'll be dutifully answering any of your questions between now and the end of February. So if you're anything like me, you have some questions percolating away, they only come to your top of mind after the session, please feel free to reach out in the WebEx space. I'll do my best to answer the questions for you. Just a little bit about myself. So I've been a TSA with Meraki now for a little over 7 years. Prior to that, you'll have to take my word for it, but I did used to work for a living. I have been involved in designing, implementing, troubleshooting complex wireless networks. So I have been in your position. I do know how complex these can get, how the advantage of troubleshooting tools can really aid your day-to-day life. I work focusing on the UKI public sector, and when I'm not simplifying my customers' adoption of cloud-managed networking, you're likely to find me outdoors, either walking my dog or riding my mountain bike or my road bike. Indeed, this photo at the bottom right-hand corner, that was taken on a ride that myself and a number of my colleagues in the UKI field team undertook at the end of October in aid of mental health charity. I believe one of my colleagues may be joining me today. He's not here. 3 people who I'm glad aren't here is my wife and my 2 teenage daughters, because I don't have to explain why they made the cutting room floor in favour of my dog and my bikes. So what am I going to be talking to you about for the next 90 minutes? So first off, I thought I'd set the scene and give you an overview of how we're using data to evolve the Meraki platform, to add intelligence to the platform for the benefit of our customers. A lot of the features I'm going to talk to you about today have a modicum of intelligence that's been added to them, features that have been evolved to take advantage of the huge, vast amount of data that we have at our disposal. We'll then dive into my carefully curated list of 10 things that you may or may not know about Meraki Wireless. Can I have a quick show of hands who manages a Meraki Wireless network on a day-to-day basis? Okay, good stuff. Okay. So hopefully I found some features you weren't aware of. I focused on some features where they might be simply enabled just by turning on a toggle switch, which give you additional insight into what's going on behind the curtain. Indeed, some features that I'm going to talk to you about today are completely obfuscated from Dashboard completely, just to give you a bit of insight as to what's going on there. And then I have gamed the system a bit. 2 things are forward glances, features that we haven't released yet. We are about to release very imminently. I had a conversation with our MR product team in San Francisco, and they agreed that I was able to share these features with you today. And if you've been to the Meraki stand over the last 2 days, you may have already seen those features. Okay, so the Meraki platform is the foundation for this data-driven evolution. Regardless whether our customers are using the native management solutions such as Dashboard or the mobile application, or maybe taking advantage of our open APIs, either via custom-built in-house development or maybe one of the ready-to-consume applications from our technical partners at the Meraki Marketplace, we are adding intelligence to the platform regardless of how you interact. That intelligence is going to be used to continuously drive new feature and development. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. As well as evolving the platform, we're also going to continue to use integrations to allow us to automate and scale. Already mentioned the Meraki Marketplace, where we have over 200 ecosystem partners providing over 500 use cases that are top of mind for our customers. We're also going to continue to integrate with the broader Cisco portfolio. So currently, we integrate with the likes of Cisco AnyConnect or Snort IDS IPS from a MX security platform perspective. It may be that you have Cisco ISE running as that single source of truth for complex Meraki full stack networks, which is driving all authorization and authentication requirements. Customers can take advantage of our integration with Cisco Umbrella, maybe focusing on simplification and using our Meraki MR Advanced license to onboard the benefit of DNS filtering without the added complexity of having to manage 2 dashboards. And we're going to continue to focus on delivering an exceptional networking experience. Through intelligence and automation, we'll allow our customers to adapt to change, to accelerate growth, and to plan for the future through data-defined networks. Our cloud-first management platform will continue to provide the flexibility, the security, the scale, and the manageability that our customers have come to rely on. And lastly, we'll continue to add data and devices to the network, enabling IT teams to bridge the gap between the digital and the physical worlds. And how are we able to do this? Well, we're in an enviable position within the cloud-managed networking industry. We have over 15 years of data at our disposal. And it's a wealth of data that we can use to evolve the platform and add intelligence right across the portfolio. Okay, so we're getting to my carefully curated list. 10 things that you may or may not know about Meraki Wireless. Okay, so I've started off with a relatively big feature within the Meraki Wireless solution and the broader Meraki platform, Meraki Health. I've also took the liberty of quoting a very intelligent person that I know. I've used this quote very often when I've been speaking to my customers. I've also heard my colleagues in the broader UKI and the EMEA team say words to this effect. Day one, when a customer deploys our solution, that is the least performant that solution will ever be. If you imagine a customer that's took advantage of a 5-year subscription license, over the term of those 5 years, with the continued feature velocity from our development teams in San Francisco, as you get towards the end of that 5-year subscription term, that product, the management platform, will be vastly different to the product that the customer enabled, continuing to add value add to that initial IT spend. So, Meraki Health, it started out actually as wireless health. So, part of my role at Meraki, I also work as what's called an MR ninja. Now, for a 46-year-old man who's going a little bit soft around the middle, I'm about as far removed as a stereotypical ninja, but it's part of a specialization we have within Meraki. So I kept a keen eye on the Meraki Health development. It started out as wireless health, taking information, taking analytical data about the success rates of devices taking each connectivity step into the network. How successful were the devices authorizing, associating to the access point? Could they authenticate, obtain an IP address, resolve DNS, and successfully pass traffic? But as the development continued, we added further data around the performance analytics. So, okay, we know how successful the devices were connecting to the network, but now how do we perceive that client's experience on the network? And then we started to take in analytical data from outside of the wireless sphere. Web application health saw us being able to provide a full end-to-end picture on a Meraki full-stack network of how various different software as an application services were being consumed, how were they performing across the LAN and the WAN. And then probably my favorite feature within the Meraki Health suite, the client health utility. Okay, so this shows the entire data path for a client through the network, using the tried and tested traffic light symbolism to highlight issues for the network administrator. Green is good, red is bad. And it seemed right that as we'd evolved outside that immediate sphere of the wireless portfolio to evolve the name, change it to Meraki Health to reflect the fact that we were actually taking in analytical data outside of the wireless platform. Now, as our team continues to drive development within San Francisco, we will continue to use the same guiding principles that we've used to date for Meraki Health. Data drives outcome. Rather than using AI and ML as a complex technology demo, we use it to drive intelligence and solve real-world outcomes. Context is critical. Okay, regardless of which touch point a customer is using to engage with the platform, we have to first ensure that that context matches. Okay, we're providing it in a fast and contextual manner. As I mentioned, I did used to work for a living. I've took one of those dreaded phone calls 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning. Something's wrong with the network. Now, it's fair to say, very few, if any of us, not even myself or my colleague Seppi in the corner there, are plugged into dashboard at 3 o'clock in the morning. So when that notification arrives via email or a notification by the mobile application, we need to ensure that the information within that alert matches the contextual data that they would be able to render if they were actually plugged into dashboard at that time. And finally, most importantly, we have to uphold our customer trust. Okay? That same on-call engineer who's been woken up silly o'clock in the morning has to have complete trust in the root cause analysis that we've conducted in order to implement the recommendations that we've made when arguably you're not going to be at your best at that time in the morning. So over the past 2 years, we have been on a journey with Meraki Health. We started out with analytical data, showing you insights into those connectivity steps of devices connecting to the network. We added timelines to be the conduit for the recommendations, to provide additional analytical information about the overall health of the network. But now we find ourselves at the optimization and the recommendation stages. We're focusing on a better user experience, providing performance optimizations whilst also gaining trust in our AI and ML capabilities through precise use case specific recommendations. But ultimately, it is a journey towards automated IT, where we will automatically configure, optimize, and heal the network through the use of vast data. Now, as I mentioned, we found ourselves at the recommendation stages. Who here has seen one of these timeline events within dashboard? Yeah, okay, not too many hands, good stuff. I'm on the right line with 10 things you didn't know. Okay, so effectively, these root cause analyses, as I mentioned, the timelines were a conduit for these recommendations. So within the timeline of a client, an access point, or at a network, you will have these context-driven root cause analysis. We will provide an overall insight into the impact of this perceived issue. Okay, is it a broad-ranging issue affecting all of my access points, all of my clients, or is it just isolated to a particular type of client or a particular access point? We'll provide the corroborating evidence. Okay, we're telling you we've got an issue, and this is why we think we have an issue. We have to be able to provide evidence, again, to garner that trust that we're actually getting the root cause analysis correct. And then lastly, as the name suggests, provide that recommendation. You may want to look at these various different troubleshooting methods. You may want to consult one of our KB articles for further information. Now, so far, the technology has been my friend. I'm now going to move away from the PowerPoint and we're going to a live demo. I have got a backup video for any reason this goes awry, but bear with me. Okay, happy days. Okay, so I'm just going to take you through a quick 15-minute walkthrough, talk-through demonstration of Meraki Health. So, effectively, we use it, or I use it, our customers use it holistically to effectively understand if there are any issues from a networking perspective. It can be used proactively. You're coming in first thing in the morning. You've got 101 things to do. It'd be great if I didn't have any issues from a wireless network perspective. I'm going to focus on our London network. And immediately as you get to a network level, you start to see the Meraki Health suite of features come bubbling through dashboard. As is often the case with Meraki Health, It's data that we've gathered for a while now, but we just render it in different places. It makes it easier to consume for our network admins. So immediately, again, as I mentioned, the traffic light symbolism. Green is good, red is bad. From a networking stack perspective, do I have any issues from my AP, my switches? Is my security appliance online? Now, Wireless Overview was released 2 or 3 months ago, just before Christmas, designed to give network admins an immediate understanding of how successful devices were connecting into the network, and then once they were connected, what was the overall performance perceived for those devices. Now, as you would expect within Dashboard, we've got that different reporting time frame going back up to the previous 7 days. You can also apply filters if you want to focus on specific SSIDs. Expanding the connection health and the performance health gives you the additional KPIs that we use to assess the network before providing this connection health score. We can understand that we've got a little under 50% of all the clients connected to this network being affected from a connectivity perspective. We can focus on each individual SSID here, and hovering over those columns will give you an indication of, okay, from that SSID's perspective, which is that connectivity step that most of the devices are failing on. We also, across here, have the 3 contributing KPIs as well as a graphical representation of the smart threshold, which is effectively the network average going back the previous 6 weeks from a data perspective to understand, okay, how successful is the network commonly in connecting these devices. Now, I just wanted to call out these individual KPIs. Now, I've worked with Meraki for 7 years. I think it's a fantastic product. Thankfully, my customers think it's a fantastic product. Every now and again, we'll release a feature, and I'll second guess myself saying, I wonder if that was the best way to do it. And point in question was these expected thresholds for the network. Now, we'd already released smart thresholds. We already had the capabilities to baseline each individual network. So when I was speaking to the product team, I was expecting that these expected values here were derived from the actual network. And I was actually firmly told, no, this is taken from 15 years of experience within cloud-managed wireless. This is what we would expect to see on a wireless network from a time to connect for a device, how long it takes to roam from AP to AP. And I was thinking, well, have we missed a trick there? But arguably, no. If you think about it, how does a network administrator know what good is? If you've had a network that, obviously nobody here, but a network that has been poorly designed, if you've always got a large roaming delta, or it always takes a long time for your clients to connect, if you were taking the average from your network, it may not reflect that you had a poor connection health. But arguably, when you compare it to the industry norm, what you're actually seeing is that your network is in detriment towards that connectivity and that performance health. Now, we also have insight into which clients have been impacted from a connectivity perspective. So I'm just going to quickly segue across to Val here, because we understand from that wireless overview that there is an authentication issue with Val's device. Again, we've got that client health widget. Hovering over each logical step in the network provides that additional contextual information. We can see that we've got a high channel utilization on the 5 gigahertz radio of the access point that Val is connected to. Now, I'm troubleshooting this from an authentication perspective, but actually, that's a point of concern. I need to have a look at that. So I am going to launch that in another tab while I stick with Val and understand from an authentication perspective what seems to be the issue. Okay, so I'm just going to filter on bad statuses because I know we have an authentication issue. And now I can see these recommendations starting to come through on the timeline. If I expand the menu here, as we saw with the screen capture within the PowerPoint slide, we see the impact this is having across the broader network client database. We can understand the corroborating evidence, the fact that we can see a radius response, put my teeth in, a radius response rate of just 38%. And then we see the various recommendations, how the network admin could troubleshoot this issue. We also recognized that Val had an issue from a parental access point, from that uplink into the network from a channel utilization perspective. So I launched the access point details tab. If I click onto the performance tab on the access point, we can see the corroborating evidence that we got initially from the wireless overview. So I've quickly segued from that holistic view of the overall network, quickly zeroed in on a client affected from an authentication issue, and also highlighted a specific issue from a channel utilization perspective. So if I scroll down here, we can actually see that broken down between general noise floor and additional 802.11 interference. The channel utilization is very high. Okay? From an auto RF perspective, we would almost consider that channel jammed. It is almost unusable because that channel utilization is quite high. What can we do with that, Steve? I hear you say. I'll get to that in the fullness of time, but I've got some, one of the forward glances is around the changes that we've made to our auto RF algorithm. Now, everything I've shown you so far within dashboard has been reactive. Okay, I've gone into dashboard. Do I have any issues? Yes, okay, my wireless overview is telling me that I've got issues from a connectivity perspective. What I want to do now is understand how I can use dashboard to work better for me. How can I get proactive alerts set up? So can I put my teeth in again, so I can understand various different trend shifts in the network. So if I segue across to the alerting page, and I mentioned earlier the smart thresholds. Bear with me a minute. My cold is catching up with me. If I scroll down to wireless alerts, we can enable the smart threshold. So effectively, you can have dashboard proactively alert you to various different network states. So as you can see in the examples here, we have 2 alerts built, enabling smart thresholds. I want you to take the network average, and then I want you to alert me when the network state is in excess of those network averages. Okay, so we've enabled smart thresholds. And I want dashboard to alert me if I see any of my devices connecting to my corporate SSID having more than 50% failure rate when trying to authenticate any of those connectivity steps. A second alert is built up, it's focusing on the guest SSID and just specifically around DHCP issues. Again, those alerts will go out to various different recipients based on that ever-changing smart threshold. So the great thing about it is we're not asking you to define a manual figure. We're allowing that data to drive that smart threshold level and change the various different network states and change the context of those alerts based on the connectivity failures. The last thing I wanted to show you is, okay, when you've enabled the smart thresholds, then from a wireless perspective, we can understand when we observe these anomalies on the network. When are my connectivity issues in excess of that smart threshold? So I go to my health, and I'm going to move back to the previous 7 days. And we're working without a safety net here, so you'll have to wait while my PC thinks about it. What we're hoping to see here from an anomalies perspective is everything's fine. We've got those thresholds defined, and you haven't seen any issues from a networking perspective. Unfortunately, we can see that actually twice over the last 7 days, we've seen the connectivity failures in excess of that smart threshold. If I hover over those, we can see that the average number of failed clients was 4, but for the anomaly here, we observed 6 clients failing to connect to the network. That was the end of the brief demo. I'm now going to quickly segue back to my slides. A well-oiled machine. Okay. Okay, so that was my pre-canned demo, just in case either my voice failed or my technical prowess with PowerPoint and multiple monitors failed as well. Number 2, okay, so we're on our way. Dual management architecture. So commonly within a Meraki network, access point has a native VLAN, and we use that native VLAN for both the management traffic between the device and the Meraki cloud, as well as the source address for internal management traffic, such as syslog, radius, SNMP polling. Now, obviously, because we're using the same interface for the management traffic, that network has access to the public internet. In some situations, customers don't want these internal management services being on a broadcast domain that has access to the public internet. But arguably, we still need our devices to talk to dashboard, otherwise, how are you going to manage these access points and get all of that goodness from a proactive wireless monitoring perspective? So this is where we can take advantage of the dual management architecture. Configuring the alternate management interface within dashboard, a separate VLAN ID, a separate management address, and then selecting which of the management protocols you want to originate from this source address. The huge benefit of this is, as the name suggests, is because your management traffic from an internal perspective is originating from that alternate address, you don't have to have access to the public internet for those integral management services. Fairly short overview on number 2, but we win and we lose. Some of them are a lot longer from an explanation perspective. A bit of an architectural one now, AP-specific SSIDs. And I'm going to use the analogy that I often come up against when utilizing this functionality, and that is with one of my education customers. Okay? They want to provide a guest SSID, but they don't want to broadcast that guest SSID right across the network. By default, you have the ability within dashboard, once you configure SSIDs, they will broadcast on every access point. Now, you also have the ability in dashboard to configure up to 15 separate networks. Now, I think a lot of us can agree that if you had 15 SSIDs broadcasting on every access point, it's not the most efficient use of the network. So why do we give you this ability to configure up to 15 SSIDs? Well, by utilizing the feature called SSID availability, it means that you can choose which SSIDs broadcast on which access points. So, going back to my analogy with the guest SSID. We have a network deployed, we've got 4 access points, and you can see that there are 3 independent tags on those access points: guest, internal, and internal IT. The IT manager of the educational institute said, Steve, we'd like this guest SSID broadcasting. We don't want it broadcasting in the learning areas. Students always take the path of least resistance. When they're in their lessons, we don't want them skipping onto the guest SSID to check their social media feeds when they should be paying attention to the seminar. So, okay, we can use SSID availability. We can build the SSID and we can say, okay, from a guest perspective, I only want the guest SSID to broadcast on APs that are tagged with guest. We then select our access points in the reception area, common areas within the cafeteria, tag those with guest, and when you build the SSID availability, you can also add a schedule that says all access points that are tagged with guest, broadcast guest, and we only want them to broadcast between 8 in the morning and 5 o'clock in the evening. So it gives you a good amount of control as to broadcasting those SSIDs on certain subsets of the access points in the network, rather than broadcasting 15 SSIDs across every access point. Just a little bit of a bonus tip. Keeping on the subject of tagging, there is a little known tag that you can add to access points, and that is run_dark. What that allows you to do is, as the name suggests, turn off the LEDs on the access point. Now, we have got the ability to run dark at a network level. That disables the LEDs on every access point in the network. Using it as a tag perspective, again, gives you that granular control to turn those LEDs on or off. Just a little snippet of insider information there. Excuse me a minute while I take a... Okay, number 4, regulatory domain enforcement. Now, we know that Cisco traditionally sells a unique SKU per country or territory, and they have a myriad of features enabled or disabled based on that hardware SKU. Because here at Cisco Meraki we focus on simplification, we use software enablement to turn on or disable those features, which gives us the advantage of being able to ship a single SKU worldwide and have dashboard enable or disable those features. This regulatory domain enforcement is true for all of our wireless access points as well as our wirelessly enabled MX security appliances. So a device's regulatory domain is determined based on its ship-to location and a subsequent geo-IP lookup. Okay? So when the device first connects to dashboard, we will do that geo-IP lookup. We will assess where that public IP address originates from a country perspective. If there is a mismatch between the subsequent geo-IP lookup or the ship to country and the network configuration from a country perspective, we will highlight this mismatch within dashboard, and we will advise an administrator to take access. You've got to be cognizant we can only have devices or networks reside in one country at any one time. Now, as well as each device effectively assessing their own regulatory domain based on that geo-IP enforcement, geo-IP lookup, we also have the concept of setting a regulatory domain at a network level based on the country setting. Now, you can set a country in dashboard one of two ways. You can, as part of your initial setup, when you're going through the network general parameters, specify which country this network resides in. We will use that as the single source of truth when understanding what regulatory domain we want to assign to the access points or the MX appliances attached to the network. Now, let's say that you are setting up your network late on a Friday afternoon. You want to wrap up, get home for the weekend, spend some time with the family, or escape to the pub. Whichever takes priority. You forget to set up that network parameter. I forget to specify what country this network will reside in. What we will do then is we will look at the first access point, the geo-IP location for that first access point, and we will use that to determine or to automatically configure the country setting for that network. That only happens if you haven't set it as a manual setting when you've done the initial configuration. Now, let's take the analogy that I didn't follow best practice. I haven't configured my network country. The first access point that's attached, and I've got my management VLAN routing out of a separate connection. It eventually VPNs into the US, and from a public IP address, from a geo-IP location perspective, that access point from a dashboard perspective looks as if the AP originates in the US. Now, if you subsequently attach all of the access points to the network and they all have this mismatch where effectively they look as if the access points are originating in a different country to the country parameters that you configured in the dashboard, we will effectively look at it and go, well, okay, we can accept that you might have got one wrong, but all of your access points originate in a different country. You must have made a mistake here. Let's check your work. So we'll actually automatically override that and say, okay, we will set that network configuration to the US because dashboard is telling us every one of the access points that's attached to that network is originating in the US. So I subsequently come in on a Monday morning, check my work, and I'm saying, well, hang on a minute. From dashboard's perspective, it thinks that all of my access points are in the US. Okay, well, from a management traffic perspective, I can understand that, but I know that they're physically located in my London office. How am I going to circumvent this? Now, historically, at this stage, it was a phone call. Pick up the phone, email your friendly network support engineer from a Meraki TAC perspective, and ask them to change the country parameters of your network, effectively overriding that geo-IP location. But what we've added in dashboard now is the ability to manually override the regulatory domain yourself. So, yes, dashboard, I accept that my access points are telling you that they're in the US, but actually I can absolutely guarantee they're in the UK. I want to select that manual country setting. We will then display these change of country terms and conditions where the network administrator needs to read through and then accept responsibility that effectively you're telling me that those access points are originating in the US. I know they're in the US. I want to override that country setting. I will take responsibility for effectively telling the dashboard to override that registered domain setting. I'm just going to take a break to take some water. How am I doing? Any questions so far? Yeah, it's in the network general parameters setting, so you have got the ability. There is a button that says change or manually override the country setting. I noticed there when I was working through the slide deck, I had to go and get the screen grab. But yeah, it's in the network general parameters setting.
Steve,
yeah.
You know that AP before I was on 90% channel utilization?
Yeah.
That's directly set that channel.
Yes, absolutely was. That was just an emulated environment. Obviously, there's no Meraki APs out in the wild that have got anywhere near that channel utilization. Okay. Number 5, in-service upgrades or ISUs. So I'm a bit of an exception amongst my colleagues. I don't come from a Cisco background prior to starting with Cisco Meraki. But I'm been led to believe that in-service upgrades is something that proponents of Catalyst Wireless have been using for a long while now. And just recently, we introduced the same concept into Dashboard. So when you push a network upgrade within Dashboard, you now have 2 options, okay? You can keep the first option. This is the historical option, where effectively we would push the firmware out to every access point on the network, and then once the access point had the firmware, it would reboot itself. We would give no account to any clients that are connected to the APs. As soon as that AP was in a fit state to reboot, we would reboot the access point. As the name suggests, that minimizes the upgrade time because you're not waiting for various different network states before you reboot those APs. However, just recently, we've now got a second option where you can minimize the client downtime. This is one of the features that is obfuscated from Dashboard. You won't see the mechanisms within Dashboard that I'm going to take you through now. Effectively, when you select the minimize client downtime, we will endeavor to upgrade the network in such a manner that it will minimize the client downtime. So the first thing we do is we look at the access point client loads. Any access point that doesn't have any clients currently connected to it are obviously a prime candidate for a reboot. Okay, so they will form one of my upgrade groups. We'll then look at the AP neighbor table to understand from a cell coverage perspective, if I upgrade and reboot AP3, for example, do I have enough overlapping coverage from neighboring APs to ensure that once that AP reboots, that I have APs within the vicinity that can accommodate the clients that are connected to it at a relatively similar signal trade-off. Once it's built up these multiple AP groups, it will upgrade them one at a time. Obviously, APs that don't have any currently connected clients, they're the first group to go. When they come back, we may be relying on those access points to actually accommodate clients that are going to roam across from another group of APs when we reboot them. Whilst we're talking about firmware, I just wanted to introduce to you the concept of a mixed firmware environment. When we release iterations of our MR firmware, not every MR family or MR model is able to accommodate the features released in that firmware, commonly due to hardware limitations from an older platform. In this situation, from a best practice perspective, the recommendation is to create smaller subsets of the network, grouping like-minded product families together so that you can effectively specify the maximum known runnable firmware for that device and taking advantage of the new features on all of the AP hardware that you can accommodate. Obviously, from a design perspective, you need to think about, okay, from a roaming perspective, can I minimize the AP hardware from a legacy perspective in one particular building or one particular floor to minimize clients moving between product families where effectively you're going to be moving from an access point that supports Cisco MBAR to another access point in another network as you roam the other side of a doorway that doesn't support that Cisco MBAR. There is a KB article on our documentation website specifying both the minimum and the maximum runnable firmware for those access points. So if you think you're going to find yourself in a situation where you have mixed product environment, you want to take advantage of all the goodness that we're going to release in the next iteration of firmware, consult the KB article, think about the network. Do I have to move hardware around in order to group these product families together? Excuse me a minute. My voice is, excuse me. My voice is an awful lot better than it was this morning. When I woke up this morning, I was thinking, oh dear, they're not going to be able to hear a word I say. You probably sat there thinking that would have been a blessed relief. Okay, RF profiles. So again, from a historical perspective, we used to have a common RF profile for every access point within the network. Auto RF would do its thing from a transmit power, a channel allocation perspective, but effectively you lacked the granular control to have different RF use cases for access points within any given network. Not long back, we introduced RF profiles, providing administrators with this capability to provide granular control on the APs. So if you had auditorium APs with a high density use case requirement, you could specify a 20 megahertz channel width. You could drop the min and max power levels. Conversely, in APs that were in a general purpose area, you could apply a different RF profile, increasing that bandwidth, 40 megahertz, for all those general purpose APs that didn't have any high density requirements. And then one of the features that you may have looked at and thought, RxSOP, not quite sure what that does. I probably won't turn that on. Is anyone familiar with Receive Starter Packet? Thank you, Seppi. I'm glad to hear that you are, my fellow MR ninja. Okay, apart from Seppi, who's paid to know what RxSOP is, anybody else aware of this steering mechanism? Good stuff. Okay, so for those of you out there that are not familiar with this feature, it is enabled or disabled in each RF profile. And what effectively it does, it allows you to artificially reduce the cell coverage of any given access point. So I've got a couple of working examples on the slides here. We have a client connected to parental access point. The transmission from that client is received at neg 85 dBm. In the top example, without RxSOP enabled, that AP will demodulate and decode that frame. Now, if you look at the same relationship with RxSOP enabled, you can see that we've actually set a threshold of neg 70 dB for this RxSOP. What that means is for any access point that receives a signal that is weaker than that threshold, the AP will not demodulate and decode that frame. So it reduces, the artificially reduces that cell size. If you think from that minimum RF threshold perspective, you're effectively reducing the coverage area of the access point. Now, as they say in the Marvel movies, with great power comes great responsibility. You have to be careful with RxSOP. You have to think about the knock-on effect it's going to have in the environment, okay? It is very highly likely, if that's even proper nomenclature, it is very likely that you will have to use professional services to remap the coverage of your network once you've used this RxSOP threshold, because effectively what you're trying to avoid, trying to mitigate, is any coverage holes within the network. If you reduce that cell coverage size, effectively you could be black holing some of your clients. But don't worry, because Dashboard has got you covered. As well as all of the other server RCAs, we actually have a server RCA for coverage hole detection. Now, this screen capturing question is certainly it's a bit of a holy grail within the SE team. Because effectively, we don't manage networks on a day-to-day basis. It's very difficult to actually find a live network with one of these RCAs from a coverage hole detection on there. And unfortunately, our customers are not keen to us go around there reducing the RxSOP and effectively creating black holes on the network just so we can get screen capture. But as we saw previously with all the other recommendations, this server RCA gives you the contextual evidence. Why do we think there is a coverage hole perceived in your network? And we make those recommendations. And arguably, more often than not, the recommendation is you're going to have to get some feet on the ground. You're going to have to walk around there with some survey software to understand from a coverage perspective, have I effectively introduced a coverage hole into my network? A question. Sorry, I can't.
Any chance that you can get some of the artificial intelligence that you're putting on to the dashboard to help out with the...
Absolutely, and we'll cover them. There is some recommendations coming on. So, from a design perspective, mentioned around that garnering trust within our customer base, we are ultimately going to provide that automated IT where we will make a recommendation. At the moment, there are action buttons that we provide within that recommendation saying, for example, we think you have a VLAN mismatch on one of your switches. Or we think you have a sticky client between these two clients. Press this disconnect button here. Effectively, we'll disassociate that client from the AP, and then we will try and encourage that client using the various different mechanisms available to us, encourage those clients to the more attractive access point. So that is my long-winded answer of saying watch this space. It's absolutely coming. And from a future glance, and I think if I can remember my slides correctly, the next feature I'm going to touch on is starts to take into account that AI and ML capabilities around being able to provide assistance to the network. Okay? Any more questions so far? No? Okay. Which leads me nicely onto number 7. Okay. This is the first forward glance that I have prepared for you within this list of items. And we are using the AI and ML capabilities that we're building out within Dashboard to evolve our auto RF algorithm. Now, our engineers across in San Francisco reliably inform me that with this new AI-powered auto RF, we will be able to reduce in-channel changes on busy access points by 50%, minimize channel changes during busy periods of any given network. And most importantly, and something that's very popular within the UK public sector field, and I'm imagining largely across your environments as well, the ability to restore access points after they've been revived from green mode. Okay, so touching on that first item, being able to reduce the in-channel change by 50%. Effectively, what we're doing with this new auto RF capability is looking at the previous 6 weeks of historical RF data for each AP in any given network, to understand from a DFS events perspective, from a Wi-Fi interference perspective, what the RF environment is like for each AP. Now, let's take the working analogy that you have issues with DFS hits on a given network. It's uncommon, I don't ever like to give definitives, it's uncommon to have a network where every access point is affected by DFS. It's commonly APs in various different subsets of the network that are affected by DFS. Now currently, you elect at a network level, or a profile level, whether or not you are going to enable DFS channels for those access points. It's a huge advantage from a spectrum perspective to have those channels available to the APs to select a channel from. So when you have an access point on a network that is affected by DFS events, historically you only had 2 options. The first option was, okay, well, I'll disable the use of those DFS channels, okay? I will protect my access points from being interfered from a DFS perspective, but effectively, you're reducing the amount of spectrum that those access points can consume. The second option would be, no, I'm going to keep the DFS channels. It's a huge advantage to the vast majority of the access points on my network, and unfortunately, you're just going to have to live with effectively having a number of APs, a smaller subset of the APs affected by DFS channels. Now with the AI-powered auto RF, we will take each individual AP's historical RF parameters to understand, okay, well, AP1 is getting affected by DFS events, but the rest of the network aren't. So we will just remove the channels offered to that access point from an auto RF perspective, just for that specific access point, allow the rest of the network to benefit from that broader spectrum. What's going to be of interest out there as well is we're actually going to give admins the ability to download the historical RF parameters from the network. So you can actually download as a CSV that 6 weeks of historical RF data that we're using to define the auto RF parameters. Excuse me a minute, I'm just a bit dry again. Second evolution of auto RF is around minimizing channel changes for access points on a given network during busy periods. Now, we're going to give network admins two options. You can dictate manually when you expect these busy times on the network, or we'll allow auto RF to tell you about it. Arguably, I can't see too many customers setting this manually, because effectively, from an automated perspective, Dashboard's going to do an awful lot better job of telling you when your busy periods are from an access point perspective than understanding each individual AP's nuances. If you imagine, as a lot of our customers are, managing networks across a global network, how am I supposed to understand, working out of my London office, what the busy periods are in my São Paulo office or my office in Seoul? Why not have dashboards say, okay, between the hours of 4 and 6, we minimize the channel changes on the APs in the São Paulo office, because that's when we see the busiest periods across the network. And the last one is the restore access points after being revived from a green mode. This is storing historical RF configuration of that access point and restoring that previously known good config upon reboot. This is hugely top of mind with my customers in the UK public sector. There is a huge emphasis around energy efficiency. Can we save money by having our access points disabled out of hours? Can we be more efficient from an energy usage perspective? Now, from a Meraki perspective, when this started to become up in conversations, we had an answer to this. Well, absolutely. Use those port profiles on your Meraki switch to effectively stipulate, let's say for argument's sake, 6 o'clock in the evening, that access point will power down, and we won't power that access point up again until 8 o'clock in the morning. Brilliant. We've even got some data together which will show you how much energy can be conserved by providing this approach. But there's always a technical objection around it. It was, okay, well, when those access points come back online, 8 o'clock in the morning, there is going to be a period of instability while those APs reconverge from an auto RF perspective. So what we're actually doing is we're latching the RF configuration for those APs for up to 7 days. So if you imagine from a network perspective, when that port profile is enabled, when those APs are powered down on the evening, when they come back up in the morning, they will be using exactly the same RF parameters they were when they were put to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening. So it's going to be hugely impactful. I know my customers were wanting to take advantage of the energy savings using those port profiles, but they had that technical objection. Okay, I don't want that period of instability in the morning while the AP is reconverging. Anybody here have an organization or customers that are looking at something similar from a utilization and from a conservation perspective? And commonly, what were the customers from a reconvergence in the morning? Was there any objections around having the APs come back up and rebalance themselves? Yeah. I had numerous customers wanted to take advantage of those port profiles, but didn't want that period of instability. Okay. Post-association steering. So effectively, for a good while now, within the platform, we've had passive steering, both from an RF perspective and from a client balancing perspective. With the latest iteration of MR firmware, there's been a concentration on applying the same steering mechanisms on a post-association, turning proactive steering on from both a band steering and a client steering perspective. Now, when I mentioned at the start around having a number of features top of mind where they were simply enabled with a toggle switch, but understanding, okay, well, how is that actually, what the mechanisms within dashboard, how is that effectively applying configuration behind the curtain. These post-association steering mechanisms were the features that I had top of mind. Okay, so from a band steering perspective, we've made a few changes to the pre-association. So effectively, when we enabled band steering, we effectively disabled the beacons on 2.4 gigahertz. However, we noticed that for devices that just did passive scans on 2.4, we're effectively precluding them from the network. So in MR29, we've actually enabled the beacons for 2.4 gigahertz SSIDs again, even with band steering enabled. Same process that if we receive a probe request from a client on 5 gigahertz, we'll suppress the response on 2.4 gigahertz. But we've also added utilization and RSSI metrics. We won't steer a client to 5 gigahertz if it's actually at a detriment to the client, if they have a worse service having been steered across that 5 gigahertz. So we will look at the utilization of that channel. We know that we only have emulated APs that have got high channel utilization, but let's say for argument's sake you did have an access point with a high channel utilization on the 5 gigahertz, we would avoid steering that client to that frequency. Same from an RSSI perspective, if the client has to sacrifice the quality of service, if they're going to get reduced signal strength, reduced data rates by moving that client to 5 gigahertz, we will preclude that client from steering. So this was all passive, okay, and this is based on the association mechanism for the client. With R29, we are now going to make efforts from a post-association perspective to effectively upgrade any of those clients that still stubbornly connect to the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. So for clients that support the 802.11 transition management frames, we'll use these frames to effectively solicit upgrades for these clients to 5 gigahertz. We'll make 2 attempts to upgrade these clients from 2.4 to 5 gigahertz. Now, as we all know, clients don't make the best decisions, even with the myriad of information that we provide around the health of the network. So if the client ignores those unsolicited transition management frames twice, we will mark that client as persistent, and we will not attempt to upgrade that client to 5 gigahertz for the duration of the time it's spent connected to the parental access point. Now, the same thought process was placed on our client balancing mechanism. Okay? Again, we had passive client balancing, where effectively on association, we would look at the load of any given AP within the network to understand which is the most attractive access point for that client. Now, when a client is roaming through a Meraki network, it's moving from its parental access point. We will look at the database that is shared amongst the access points on a given network to understand 2 things: their current client load and also the received signal strength they have for this client. We're looking for an RSSI in excess of 30 dB to make an access point a viable client for that, an access point, a viable roaming candidate for that client. So I've got 5 access points in the vicinity of this client. Only 3 of those access points have a strong enough signal. They will form what's called the resource group for that client. Once we have the resource group for that client, we then look at the current client load of each of those APs. So I've got 3 APs within my resource group. AP1 has 30 clients, AP2 has 20 clients, and AP3 has 5 clients. From our perspective and from the client's perspective, AP3 is the most attractive access point for them, but also for us from a network experience perspective. So we will use the mechanisms available to us to encourage that client to AP3. Now, as is the case with the band steering, with client balancing, we now provide proactive post-association balancing as well. So again, taking advantage of those 802.11 BSS transition management frames, we'll again make unsolicited attempts to move that client to the more attractive access point from a client perspective. Now, one thing we did observe is that some clients who were 802.11v capable, as they were roaming from AP to AP, didn't always advertise their capabilities to use the 802.11v feature. So what we've also done within that client database is we've actually tracked each client that is capable of supporting 802.11v and latched that information in the database. So an AP can look up on the client database to understand, yes, that client supports 802.11v. I can make unsolicited attempts to move that client to an access point with a lesser load. Post-association, we will also make attempts to clients that don't support 802.11v as well by using disassociating frames to effectively try and encourage that client to move to one of the APs with the less client load. How are we going? Any more questions? No? Okay. Right, so anyone out there, I'm assuming there's a lot of yeses here, had to configure and design layer 3 roaming for a given wireless network, commonly across a campus environment. Yeah. I did back in the day when I used to design these networks, and it's always a complex environment. It's always a requirement for clients to be able to move across the layer 3 boundaries in the network whilst also maintaining that client IP service. Now, within Meraki, we have 2 design architectures for layer 3 roaming. The first one is layer 3 roaming with a concentrator. Effectively, on the SSID by SSID level, you have the ability to configure the client IP assignment. So it's not an all or nothing. You're effectively just designing the layer 3 roaming for any given SSID. So with layer 3 roaming to a concentrator, you have a Meraki MX appliance commonly located at the core of the network, and the SSID is building a tunnel from the layer 3 enabled access points to the MX, and the MX is acting as that point of ingress into the network. Now, the second option open to us is a design architecture called distributed layer 3 roaming. And effectively what we do with distributed layer 3 roaming, we remove that centralized data plane. We don't have the Meraki MX on the network anymore. And we actually rely on the AP to AP relationships to provide that client IP integrity for a client roaming through the network. Now, from a design perspective, there's a huge advantage to it. You're removing that reliance on the centralized data plane. We support all of the fast roaming capabilities within the distributed layer 3 roaming architecture. So I just wanted to take a few slides now just to talk you through how the AP to AP communications work from a distributed layer 3 environment. I'll just take a pause just to get some water. Okay, so when you enable an SSID for distributed layer 3 roaming, effectively the APs are relying on the database that is shared amongst the access points across the management VLAN and across layer 3 boundaries using the inter-AP communication and the communication with dashboard. When a client first connects to the network, an AP will look to the database to understand, has that client been observed on the network previously? Has it attached to the network previously? If the answer is if the answer is no, then effectively what it will do is it will attach the client to a specific broadcast domain, and it will also using broadcast domain mappings, it will understand from all of the VLANs that it's observed. So it's native VLAN, any VLAN that's attached from an SSID perspective, any VLAN that it's seen been observed, returned as part of a group policy, it will understand which APs are attached to the same broadcast domain. And effectively, it will create what's called an anchor set. So it elects itself as one of the anchor APs within the database for this client, as well as electing 2 other APs within the same broadcast domain as alternate anchors within the anchor set. It then provides that update to the APs on the network saying, okay, we now have this client attached on VLAN 10. We have 3 candidates within the anchor set for this client. Now, as the client starts to roam through the network, it moves from AP1 to AP2. And AP2 consults this database and asks itself a question. Can I serve this client's IP address? Am I a member of the same broadcast domain that this client is attached to from a VLAN perspective? And now this is the important part, and this is why this solution scales so well. If access point 2 in this question is attached to the same broadcast domain, it will assign itself as the new anchor for this access point, and again, will pick 2 anchor candidates to add to the anchor set. And what this allows distributed layer 3 roaming to do is to get around the concept of, if every client is coming through a specific ingress point in a network, how do I stop my access points being overconsumed? If we never move that anchor set on, all the clients will have to ultimately tunnel back to those first APs on the network. But conceptually, as a client attaches to the network initially, as it moves through the building, I think it's fair to say that to begin with, they are going to be layer 2 roams. You're not going to have your broadcast domain so small that it moves from AP to AP and suddenly it's gone across a layer 3 boundary. So using this ability to pass on that anchor set, pass on that candidacy for the client, allows this solution to scale. Now, let's take the same roaming solution, the same roaming question, and as the client traverses from AP1 to AP2, it's actually moving across the layer 3 boundary. AP2 looks up that client in the client database. I cannot serve that client's IP address. But I know who can, because I look up the database and I can understand where my anchor set is. I know that it's AP3 in the reception, and I've also got 2 other candidate access points who can serve that broadcast domain for the client. So I will pick one of those anchor candidates based on client load, and I will effectively build a tunnel from what is now effectively the host AP. So AP2 is the host AP, and it will tunnel that client's traffic back to AP1 or to the predetermined anchor, and effectively allow that client to maintain the same client IP session as it moves across that layer 3 boundary. Any questions on distributed layer 3 roaming? Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, from a design perspective, it's supported across the entire AP portfolio, yeah. Okay. Any other questions? No? So say again? Oh, no. So, okay, so if you imagine the APs are mapping every broadcast domain that they can observe. So it could be native VLAN. It could be they have half a dozen SSIDs with a VLAN attached. They could be having multiple group policies being assigned to clients, and they're assigning VLANs that are actually effectively pruned from their config, but they've been observed as being allocated to clients. So effectively, they're sending out probes on all of those broadcast domains to build a picture of where the broadcast domains reside, and then effectively, they will advertise their AP VLAN ID into the database for each broadcast domain. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Any more? Yes. Absolutely, yes. So effectively, when you're building, the SSID, it's selected in the client IP assignment. So commonly, more often than not, it's a bridged architecture. So you're building your SSID profile, and you're electing to, okay, well, I'm building my corporate SSID. I'll have a catch-all VLAN of VLAN 10, but I'm expecting that my domain machines and my trusted clients are going to use group policy, and I'm going to have various different VLAN IDs assigned as part of that group policy. So it's one of the things that I do labour on with partners and customers in the UK. Is it's true freedom of choice. You don't have to nail all your colours to one mast and say, okay, well, I'm just deploying distributed layer 3 roaming on every SSID from this AP. It's done on an SSID basis. Okay. Right. Has anyone visited the Meraki stand so far? Okay. Well, you may or may not have seen this, but item number 10 is the second forward glance to a feature that's going to be available very, very shortly. Okay. If you go to the booth today, if you go to the World of Solutions, if you're lucky enough to avoid my shift and speak to one of my learned colleagues, they will be able to show you this roaming visualization. But effectively, we've added a new tab to the client database, and we're providing graphical representation of a client's roaming journey through the network. I think it's fair to say, based on my own experience, roaming issues are probably one of the hardest things to troubleshoot on a network. Okay, it may not even effectively be a roaming issue. It could just be a client that's sat and it's flip-flopping between APs. As I mentioned, I know you only think I'm a day over 30, but I've been involved with wireless a little over 20 years now, and it never used to be an issue because every client was stationary. You turn the Wi-Fi network on, but every client was sat at a desk. Roaming issues were very few and far between. But as my daughters have told me, as they've come down the stairs from the bedroom, through the hallway and into the kitchen, they expect to be able to watch cats playing ping pong on TikTok all the way through the network. Okay, client users rely on this roaming capabilities for critical applications like TikTok. My daughters find their way into a lot of my demo scripts, and if they don't always come out looking good on it either. So, roaming visualization, we've had features within Dashboard already. So the ability to create packet captures for access points across the network. One of the hardest things when troubleshooting a roaming issue is trying to second guess where the client is actually going to attach on the network. Okay, I can look at my APs and I think, well, okay, well, if I was making a sensible decision, as I was making my way through this room, I'd go from that AP to that AP to that AP. Okay, well, I'll set up various different sniffing software. I'll put them on the frequencies of all those APs. I'll nail the APs to a static channel so they're not going to hop over anyways. It's very, very complex. And then the client goes and does something a bit non-default and attaches to an access point above or below. With this client visualization, we will show each type of roam that client has conducted as it moves through the network. Using that traffic light symbolism, green is good, red is bad, that I've already showed you is extensively utilized through Dashboard. We will highlight good roams, bad roams, suboptimal roams, where actually, despite our best efforts, maybe we were trying to use that passive steering as the client was roaming, and we failed, and that client didn't accept a connection to 5 gigahertz, or did go to an access point that was overconsumed from a client perspective. We'll also provide information on clients that are ping-ponging between APs, and also clients that are attached to a suboptimal access point. So I think everybody in this room can probably put their hand up and say they've had a situation where they've had a client stubbornly connect to an access point which is nowhere near the optimal access point, but it just stubbornly holds onto it. And we will show you all of the historical roams for that client, going back to a period of 7 days. As well as giving you that graphical representation, we'll also provide an event log of each roam. Again, providing that same contextual data to understand if I'm looking at the graphical representation or if I'm looking at the event log, the data is the same. Now, if we do have one of those roaming events, the aforementioned sticky client, in very much the same way as the coverage hole detection, and again, this is the second holy grail when it comes to a screen capture. I like to speak to members of the MR product team because I haven't observed a sticky client on the network, as well as providing that insight within the roaming visualization. we've also got the corresponding event within the RCA within the timeline. So you can understand from this example that actually the client was attached to the mezzanine AP, a very low signal quality, despite having 3 APs in the vicinity that had a much better signal strength for that client. Very, very good. It's a very impactful demonstration. I do encourage you to go and see my colleagues in the world of solutions. I will do my best now to emulate their efforts. If I can find my mouse, there we go. Okay, so I'm just going to, no doubt I'm going to have to log back into, there we go. Yeah, sure.
Are you expecting to support CLI?
Say again?
CLI for monitoring.
A CLI? No, I don't anticipate we'll support CLI for monitoring, no. No.
Especially like portfolio like Meraki.
Yeah, it's commonly been, I mean, obviously we've got the local status page from an AP and switch and hardware perspective, but the thought's always been that from a simplicity perspective with a focus on ease of use, the dashboard and the APIs will remain the main point of management for the access points.
That makes the solution not scalable. Too many IPs. As soon as you have 200-300 IPs, oh, sorry. Then without CLI, it's a little bit difficult to manage just with the dashboard.
Are you just talking about the sheer weight of access points?
Yes.
Well, obviously from a management perspective, I mean, if you were CLI onto a WRC, you'd still be searching for each access point based on a name or an IP address. You have the same capabilities within dashboard, within those OmniSearch windows there, where you can effectively search for a given access point. But the troubleshooting journey within dashboard is slightly different because we're commonly going from a client. We're looking at that client database. We already show you the data which the parental AP that client is connected to. So from a management perspective, it's very quickly to segue from the client to the AP in question.
Like debugging, for example.
So say, okay.
Debug.
From a debugging perspective, well, commonly all of the tools are, maybe we'll take this one offline after the session because I don't think we're quite talking at the same, we've got cross paths, but maybe we'll take it offline. Demo perspective, right. Okay, so within the London network, we know that we have, I want to go through to the corporate network now. Okay, and we're going to focus on our San Francisco network. Okay. And we have a likely candidate from a roaming perspective. And now we see the aforementioned roaming tab. We have that reporting time frame going back up to the previous 7 days. You have a time frame from a roaming status perspective. Again, you can identify specific roams based on the traffic light symbolism. So I can see here that I've actually got a suboptimal roam. So that sliding by has given you 1 hour windows into the roaming journey of a particular client. Now I can see here within that hour we have a number of bad roams, suboptimal roams, and when I use the cursor highlighting over that suboptimal roam and I drill into that specific event, it changes the time frame to a 2-minute window, and if I hover over that roaming event, I get the additional context. Why did dashboard think that was a suboptimal roam? Well, actually you can see that when the client moved from AP23 to AP12, it actually sacrificed signal strength. Potentially it's negotiating a lower data rate. From a quality of service perspective, it's a suboptimal roam. And if I scroll down in the event log, from a corroborating evidence perspective, I've also got that event log highlighting the same data from the suboptimal roam. Any questions from a roaming visualization perspective?
I
Yep.
think also last slide
Yeah.
But for me, if the Meraki dashboard knows that that's the solution, why doesn't it just disconnect to the client and make it connected?
This goes back to the slide around. Okay, so for those of you who didn't hear, the question was around why aren't we automating the disconnect for the client? Why is there still an action button or a recommendation? And it's all about that Meraki health journey to automated IT. So at the moment, we're still gathering trust with our customers around our AI and ML capabilities. So rather than just turning on self-automated networks day one and say, don't worry, we've got it from here, our customers are seeing the recommendations that we're making, seeing the root cause analysis that we're conducting and garnering trust in, okay, well, more often than not, Meraki's getting it right. Okay, I know that if I disconnect my client, or if I know that they tell me I've got a VLAN mismatch, or I've got a sticky client, ultimately, we will get to that stage where we'll automate, we'll remediate that issue. But at the moment, the design ethos is to leave control in the hands of the network administrator whilst we garner that trust from an AI and ML capabilities. Okay? Right. Well, that actually, I did have a pre-canned demo again. I'm glad I didn't play this one. As I mentioned, I got a call from my daughter, and you can hear me sniffing away in the background on this video. So I'm glad that the demos worked for me today. From my perspective, that's everything that I had from a presentation. I know we've had Q&As we've gone through, but I didn't know if there was any outstanding questions.
On your slide deck,
Yep.
a few slides back, there was on the Roman screen.
Yep.
It said Roman, and there was a drop-down list as if there would have been other options, but in the demo dashboard,
Okay. Well observed. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So effectively, what we've got in the emulator, it's not an emulated environment, but we've got the roaming tab turned on, but some of the features aren't enabled from a demonstration perspective. So if you also noticed the sticky client, when you looked at the roaming events, sticky client wasn't actually there in the emulated environment. So from a roaming perspective, you can actually filter on just show me suboptimal roams, or just show me what you would envisage as ping-pong events between clients on a neighboring AP. So as you can imagine from utilizing other different parts of health, for example, filtering in wireless overview based on SSID, just allows you to focus on specific events within the roaming event log and the roaming visualization. Any more for any more? No?
Maybe the release date?
Oh, the release date. Well, it's getting a bit warm in here, isn't it? Okay, nobody's recording this, are they? I am reliably informed by our product team that we're likely to see roaming visualization in beta towards the middle to end of next month. Don't quote me on that. I'm only working off my last known good intelligence, similar to our RF configurations. Just a small personal note, as you probably gathered, this is my first time presenting at Cisco Live, so I would encourage you to complete your survey reports. Please be kind, and if you complete 4, then you are in the hat to receive a Cisco Live T-shirt. But obviously, this isn't it. We've still got another 2 full days. So I would encourage you to continue your education. Come and see myself or my colleagues in the Cisco Showcase and get another demonstration of roaming visualization. Make your bookings with the engineers. Attend the walk-in labs. Just basically take as much advantage of the resources that are laid on for you this week as possible. I'd just like to leave by saying it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your thank you for your attention. I hope my voice didn't fail me too badly. And yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.